Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism. This is a podcast exploring how we can best maintain a sense of energy, inspiration, and wakefulness while navigating the uncertainties and challenges of the modern world. My name is Brett Kane, and I'll be your host on this journey as we have a multidisciplinary conversation with a wide variety of speakers from all around the globe. This typically brings us into dialogue with spiritual teachers, somatic therapists, artists, activists, just about anyone else who I feel is bearing this torch well. For today's episode, we are joined by one of the world's top leading pain researchers, Dr. Lorimer Moseley. Many folks in the world of manual and physical therapy will surely recognize this gentleman, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, Dr. Moseley is a Bradley Distinguished Professor at the University of South Australia, as well as a Professor of Clinical Neuroscience. He's also the Foundation Chair in Physiotherapy. Not only does he have an extensive list of qualifications beyond this, he was also made an Officer in the Order of Australia for his distinguished service to medical research and science communication, to education, to the study of pain and its management, and to humanity at large. For those of us who aren't in Australia, this is the literal highest form of recognition for outstanding achievement and service. So needless to say, Dr. Moseley is hugely influential to the folks in the field working with those who are struggling with painful conditions, which includes me as a massage therapist. I can say for myself that contacting Dr. Moseley's work has been wildly transformational for the way that I treat and relate to pain. It's my highest aspiration that this conversation is able to transmit some of that inspiration which has caused me to massively pivot in my professional practice. To do that, we explore some of the most interesting findings from the past 30 or so years of research into pain and its management, namely the notion that pain has less to do with injury detection and more to do with protection and the promotion of healing. For those of you who might not see the connection this has to some of the themes in this show, I'd start by saying that we're all going to hurt at some point. It's one of the major motivators of behavior change within the human experience next to eating and procreation, whether it's an achy back, tense shoulders, or something more terminal. We and the people we care about are going to move in and out of pain throughout our whole lives. So how we experience and contextualize it can directly change the ways we hold space for it. This in turn helps us connect more deeply to our bodies, to be more compassionate for those in our lives who are struggling. So if this leaves you inspired and you want to continue your journey into the world of pain science, I'd strongly recommend checking out some of Dr. Moseley's other work, which is scattered all across the internet. He has tons of lectures, podcasts, TED Talks, all over YouTube, as well as some great books which dive into the material much deeper than an hour typically allows. I'd also recommend checking out his grassroots nonprofit, painrevolution.org. If you want to support this show, you can head on over to patreon.com/21stcenturyvitalism and consider becoming a patron. It really does help me keep the lights on and the wheels greased so that we can continue moving forward. But I also understand that finances are a little tricky these days. So if that is the case for you, you're also welcome to just subscribe at YouTube, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook. Whatever it is in the digital age shuffle that you typically do, I see each and every one of you who are hopping on board, and I'm just so appreciative. So that's going to be it. That's what we're talking about today. Without further ado, please sit back, drink some tea, do some stretches. Most importantly, open your heart for Dr. Lorimer Moseley. Okay, so Lorimer, hello. We are now live. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for giving me some of your time. I'm sure you have a lot on your plate, so I do not take this lightly. How are you today?
Yeah, no worries. I'm great, thanks. Just scooted through the parklands to work. It's early in the morning here. It's very crisp. Thanks for having me on your show. It's fantastic.
Yeah, wonderful. So there's going to be a lot of people that might not be totally hip to who you are. So I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share a little bit of your background and your training so that people understand that you know what you're talking about when we get into some of this material, because some of it is pretty hard to believe, I've found.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess what brought you to where you are right now?
How long have we got?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's That's a question, the answer to which changes as I get older and I understand myself better. But I guess from a chronological account of how I got here, after school I was a football player, soccer, I think you guys would call it, and that was great until I did an overhead kick and I landed on a sprinkler, and I was in a world of bother for probably 8 or 9 years, and for most of that time, I was in a lot of pain, but I looked reasonably well, and I was reasonably fit, and uh, I did a physiotherapy degree. I went hitchhiking around the country, and all sorts of shenanigans. And now, when I look back, clearly that is an important part of my story. But at the if I was asked this question 20 years ago, I would have said, well, I've always been fascinated in humans, and pain is such an intense and common feeling, and it makes sense that I got into that, but it certainly wasn't strategic. I was working in a pain clinic for several years, disillusioned with my inability to help people. And I began explaining to people why I felt like I wasn't going to be very much help. And that involved explaining to them my understanding of what was going on inside their body. I've always had a voracious appetite for biology and neuroscience and things like that. And this was before I did a PhD. I was still reading very heavily and explaining to people why me as a physiotherapist or physical therapist didn't have much to offer. And then they started coming back a week or two later saying, I don't know what we did last time, but can we do it again? I'm feeling a bit more positive. I'm feeling a bit better. My pain's not quite as bad. So that led me to wonder whether the understanding that I was bringing them had some sort of effect on their pain. And then I got out of the blue, I got offered a scholarship to do a PhD at the university that I'd done my physical therapy degree at. Thought that sounded like fun. I thought I'd be able to take up smoking and wear a suede jacket with patches on the arms. And that really did just turn on the lights for me as far as how good is this, just learning deeply about things. And my PhD was broadly in cognitive neuroscience and neurophysiology. Then I did a postdoctoral fellowship in Queensland here, looking at how the brain controls movement. And then I worked at the University of Oxford in the UK, looking at how the brain makes pain, deeper and deeper into neural networks and neurophysiology and how the brain does most things. And then one evening in Oxford, I came in, and the beautiful Anna, with whom I share my life, was in tears, and I asked her, being a very compassionate man, I said, "What's wrong, Anna?" And she said, "I need to go home." And her reasons for wanting to come back to Australia were very noble and good, and my reasons for wanting to stay at Oxford were primarily vanity. And we came home, and pretty much since then, I've been the chair of physiotherapy at the University of South Australia. I've been funded my whole career by government grants to do research, and throughout that whole story, since I took up my PhD, I've worked between around about 1 day a week, still seeing patients. That's now down to 3 or 4 patients a week, but I'm still active clinically. But if your question was, what's your job title? My job title is sort of tells you what I do in a way. I'm the foundation chair in physiotherapy. I'm a distinguished professor of clinical neuroscience. So that's, my work is sort of at the boundary of those things, understanding the scientific basis for why we hurt, how we can recover, and in the last few years, other protective feelings like fear, anxiety, I would say depression, fatigue, the need to wee, the need to poo, the need to eat. These are all the feelings of these things, not the actual need, but the feeling that you need to do that.
Yeah.
So that's me.
Yeah, wonderful. That's more thorough than I probably could have offered.
Well,
So
I
no,
apologize if I've
no, it's it's
rambled.
it's it's totally perfect. And I'm kind of curious. So I think this leads me to the next part of When you were practicing as a physiotherapy and you were telling your clients, I don't even know if I can help you, what was it exactly that you had learned at that point that led you to that kind of belief? Like, what are some of these core, maybe principles that have shifted the way that you relate to pain?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question. I think back then, I mean, this is in the late 1990s. Man, I'm old, right? Uh, it's
You
amazing
look
when I
great.
reflect on that.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I didn't feel great riding up the hill yesterday morning, I must say.
Yeah.
But so I think back then my physiotherapy training, even through my training, being someone who was living the experience of pain and having a previous experience of trauma, I was really familiar with it was really clear to me that there was this disconnect between how we were talking about pain and fear and the biology that I was learning, even at university in the early 90s. I would go into the biology and neuroscience lectures and material, fascinated, excited about what they had to offer. Then I'd go into the clinical training and I'd just think, this is a whole different framework. It's a whole different basis for what we do. It was really, really quite bizarre even then. As a clinician, I think in answer to your question, I was just learning about the broadly the concept of central sensitization that was first, I guess, proposed by Clifford Wolff in 1983. So I was 13
Wow.
when that was published, and then 15 years later, it was only just starting to penetrate the conversations that I was privy to. So I think this idea that as pain persists, I would now say your pain system just becomes way more efficient and way more effective. And if you look at the variability between humans at each stage of the protective system, and if you start that at the tissue damage level and you finish it at the feeling of pain level, so all the stuff that lies in between there, the most predictable, least variable component is tissue healing. And
Mm.
the data are really clear on that, and they've been very clear on that for decades. The next most variable, I guess, is the behavior of nociceptors. So these neurons that don't have specialized detectors, they sit across our tissues and they respond to a change in the environment. And they're extraordinarily complex and, in my view, just amazingly, fearfully, wonderfully complex and beautiful, the way they monitor the environment of our body. There's not much variability between humans in that. The
Mm.
only consistent variability is a tiny, tiny difference between redheads and non-redheads in the way
Oh,
these ion channels work. Other than that, there's really not much difference in how they work. Then you go into the dorsal root ganglion, which is where the cell body of all these neurons lies. It's outside of the spinal cord. And now we're starting to see some differences in behavior between individuals. Then you go into the spinal cord, it's a bit more different. You go into the thalamus or the bottom of the brain, it's a bit more different. Go into how the whole brain is working, how it interfaces with the immune system and the endocrine system, and how the organism behaves. It's highly, highly different. So the real variability, when going back to your question, for me was in stuff that I just felt like I had no expertise in.
mm.
How does the nervous system? How do I change the sensitivity of your pain system with the skill set I have? And I didn't feel like I had a skill set. All of my skill sets were, how do I change your body? And all the evidence suggested your body's probably not the problem.
Yeah.
Or how do I give you temporary pain relief? And the techniques that I had were very good at that. But as I learned more about how they worked, I started to think this is potentially iatrogenic. This is potentially doing harm by continually giving analgesia to an organism that's trying to solve a much grander, deeper, threatening problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you think I've covered off your question?
Yeah, I think that is a pretty good timeline. But I think there's going to be some people. I'm fairly well read with this kind of material, so I'm following. But some people might not even understand like the basics of the fact that you said like the body probably isn't the problem, and that the focus is on changing the pain sensitivity system rather than responding to a potential injury. I'm a massage therapist by trade, and this is something I'm learning how to communicate with my clients
Mm,
because predominantly it's well understood by most people that when you hurt, it's because something is injured. And
mm.
all the work that you've put out shows that it's a lot more complex and has more to do with protection detection than it is actually injury. So, laying out everything that you have, could you just kind of articulate maybe a case against this notion of structuralism or biomechanical
Mm.
kind of like boogeymen that most people are still somehow trapped in?
Well, let me start by responding to part of that question that reminds me to be more careful with my words.
Hmm.
And that is when I said the body's not the problem, what I should have said is the tissues in the painful body part are probably not damaged or inflamed. Now, there are situations when they can be in chronic pain, particularly in chronic disease, inflammatory disease, and stuff like that. But I need to be careful on that because a lot of our research now is working very closely with consumers or patient partners, and they advise us on phrases to use and avoid and ideas that are easy and hard. And they really do, at the moment, they're guiding our patient pain education content. So when I'm working with those people, there's this shared understanding of what things mean. So when I said body, I really should have said the tissues, not the human, because we are a unified organism. I'm convinced of that. That you can't think without something happening in your body, and you can't do something in your body without thinking in some way, even if it's somewhere deep in your nervous system. To provide a counter to that sort of structural bogeyman idea, I guess my lead into a request like that is always to emphasize, of course, it feels like you're broken. Absolutely legit. I mean, so many people with chronic pain have spent half their clinical interactions being told this must be really bad because of what you're feeling, and the other half being told this is, you're probably making this up or malingering, or you're psychologically vulnerable or questionable or got a personality problem or not believed. And this is a horrible situation to be in, and I really want to avoid giving either of those messages, because I think that I was talking about healing rates and the behavior of tissue when it's put under structured and graded load is pretty predictable in what it does. But as you said, pain is so much more complex than detecting when tissues are in a dangerous situation. But even that is a really important concept, and it's a real mind mess, this, to move away from the idea that pain signals damage or pathology. Pain detects something being wrong. The evidence is, in my view, very compelling that actually pain is warning you that something's about to go wrong. And that's it, in my view, that's its protective function. That the vast majority of pains that any of us feel, we stop what we're doing before we're injured. And when we run education sessions for big groups of the general public, and we do performances that reenact sort of some of this stuff. How does pain work? And the key point is that there might be someone playing the role of tissue damage, and someone else playing the role of mechanical loading on the tissues of the body. And the objective of the mechanical load is to get as much performance out of the body as you can without reaching the damage. So they're not able to high five. those two people. And the reason they can't is that in between them sits pain. And if you look at one end of the system to an elite performer, I do a fair bit of work with elite athletes and performers. And for those people, the person playing pain sits very close in front of the person playing tissue damage. So they can get all this performance out of their body before pain stops them. At the other end might be someone who's had pain for several years, wakes up most mornings with pain. And in that scenario, the person playing pain will be a long way from the person playing tissue damage. But when the mechanical loading hits the pain, it feels like you're breaking. It feels like you're about to break. And any health professional who understands enhanced sensitivity in the system and still implies you've got nothing to be worried about, I think is misunderstanding, because of course it's worrying because it's so brutal. It's horrible and you can't do anything. And if we hang on to the idea that pain is a marker of tissue pathology or inflammation or damage, if it's measuring that, then these people have no choice but to conclude they're about to fall apart, literally fall apart. And that's terrifying. You get up out of bed in the morning and your back hurts, and you, like most humans in modern Western world, conclude that you are damaging your back in that moment. You're hardly putting any load through it. I mean, that's very worrying. Yeah, so I guess that's the first. I think there are three big mind messes in modern pain science. I think the first one is pain protects, it doesn't detect damage. And the first question I would get from a patient who's on the ball thinking through this is, well, that's got to be bullshit, because when I really wrecked my ankle, it was the most painful thing I've had. So you can see the logic there. And my response to that will be, the reason that it was the most painful thing that you had, in my view, is that the system wound itself completely up so that you couldn't even put your foot on the ground while the tissues of your ankle started to heal. So that's what gives them the opportunity to heal. And we've been working with patient partners, as I said, for a long time, and we've asked now over 800 people who have been really disabled by chronic pain for about 5 years on average, but who see themselves as greatly improved or recovered completely. We asked these people, how did you do it? What were the game changers for you? And out of all that research, we've got at least a dozen research articles published on this. We've sort of distilled it down to 4 essential pain facts. And the first essential pain fact that we think is important for people to get their head around is that pain protects us and promotes healing. And that's a challenging idea even within the pain clinical field. It's not very challenging within the pain science field, because people who study how neurons work appreciate that neurons are not activated by damage. They become way more sensitive in the presence of damage. And the second essential pain fact is that persisting pain overprotects us and prevents recovery. The third is that many factors influence pain. And the fourth is that your system is retrainable to return to more normal levels of sensitivity. And they're the key clinches that have changed people's lives.
Yeah. So what is it that determines this level of sensitivity? Say you have your two actors, the space between them. Why is it that the elite athletes system, they can be a lot closer, but for somebody who wakes up with a sore back or something like that, are the variables pretty unique per each person, or is there some key ones that keep showing up in the research?
Yeah, well, both of those things.
Hmm.
There are surefire ways to increase the sensitivity of the pain system in moments. The most obvious way to do that is to make a tissue inflamed. So you have an injury or significant tissue inflammation, then the whole system ramps up very quickly, as though that actor playing pain quickly runs further from tissue damage to stop mechanical loading from getting anywhere near it. The other way you can do it actually is through careful cognitive manipulations. And for a long time, I've done little demonstrations at schools, primary school, I don't know what you'd call it, but the first school up to when you're about 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah, elementary school.
Elementary school. And I do this demonstration that, in my view, shows how quickly the pain system can increase its sensitivity. And remember that when I say the pain system, I mean everything in that unified organism that sits in the back end of making pain, making the feeling in your body that's unpleasant and makes you want to stop it. And the experiment is that I use one of those little compasses that you draw circles with. People might not even use them anymore, but
I remember.
They have a really sharp point, and they like a V, and you change the width of the V, have a very sharp point, and then the other point might be a pencil. But in the experiment I do, I have one with an eraser on the end. So what do you call them? Yeah, you call them erasers. Yeah, we call them rubbers. That's why. And
that's a different thing in America.
Yeah. So what I do is I get usually the class bully out the front, and it's just nice and tough, and I just prick him softly or her softly on the skin of the palm of the hand, and it hurts a little bit. And I say, okay, I'm going to now show you how closing your eyes can change how much something hurts. So I'm going to do 2 little pricks, and then I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I'm going to give you a harder prick. Are you ready? Full consent. The teacher's there. Everything. All the children are watching. And I go sharp, sharp, close your eyes, and then I flip the compass and I do it with the eraser. Mm-hmm. And they always, they're tough. But I say, and how was that? I think it was about the same as the first 2, maybe a little bit more painful. And I've now been recording these, so I've got 60 triplets.
Yeah.
And the last of those stimuli, on average, is more painful than the first 2, even though the last one involves no threat to body tissue whatsoever. The last one would not activate the particular neurons that respond to rapid change in environment that we call nociceptors. So that, in my view, that's an example of the pain system in that moment ramping everything up because they've been alerted that I'm going to do a harder prick. So it's just that one little bit of information. And we've done a whole lot of experiments that are a bit more real world than that in our lab, where we for example, put a very cold piece of metal on people's skin, but we show them a red light to go with it. And that makes it more painful on average than showing them a blue light. So that the color cue has increased what I use the phrase the safety buffer provided by pain, increase the pain system sensitivity. So we know all those things, but we can add into the mix your individual genetics, every moment you've ever had in your life that might be relevant.
Small thing.
yeah, like it's massive, right? The set point of your immune system at that moment in time, and that's also fluctuating over time. And some people who are, they're under some degree of existential threat most of their life will have an immune set point that's different, and that changes the sensitivity of synapses within this sort of danger pain system. Training, intentional exposure. I think one reason that elite athletes have such a small safety buffer is that they've practiced so much of getting the maximum they can out of their body and not damaging, and their pain system learns, okay, you're actually safe. You're safe. I don't need to protect you. Competing demands. I mean, if you had someone cutting your leg with a knife and someone else pointing a gun at your head, guarantee you won't be in pain in your leg. You will be terrified and trying to avoid the gun. So in that moment, the pain system says this is not an important priority. And the way that we talk about this, I listen to myself here and I think, of course, we don't have these defined systems that are like individual actors inside us negotiating and deciding things. And I've been criticized very heavily on social media for using phrases like the brain decides when to make pain. Now, that's possibly a careless, but it's certainly generated by patient partners as a way to understand things. It's not like the brain sits there and makes a decision. The brain is an extraordinarily complex biological unit that I think doesn't have an executive controller. But we sometimes use a language like this, So I use the language that the brain prioritizes your survival over keeping, over the safety of one leg. How the brain does that, I don't know, and I don't think anyone really knows how it does that. Anyway, it's clearly, whenever I'm in a situation like this, Brett, I always find myself, the whispering in the back of my head is, stop talking. But I just find it so interesting. So I just like talking about it.
Yeah.
So I apologize.
No, I honestly love hearing about it. And, I've listened to quite a few of your lectures, but I feel like each one you do end up kind of coming at it from different angles. So I'm glad we're able to touch on this. And one of the parts that really interests me, especially as a massage therapist, because I've kind of had that dark night of the soul where I've kind of like, there's nothing I can do to help you. And I've actually kind of walked back from that in a sense. And I think the place where I can maybe help the most is kind of something you touched up on. And I guess the phrases that I've used is being able to change the meaning of a sensation and then the context. So like in the case of the cold metal and the red light, there's a different like meaning associated to that red light. And to me, that is one of the more interesting things about working with pain as a professional is having this opportunity to help people have a different embodied meaning and relationship to their sensations by having a conversation before the massage and then being able to provide this really novelly sensory rich kind of experience after having that conversation, trying to frame things in a way. So I guess I'm just curious about the therapeutic potential of using like meaning change and a different therapeutic context as a way to help. Is that something
Mm.
that has kind of came up in your research at all?
Yeah, oh, look, we haven't devised many experiments to interrogate that kind of idea, um, because they're very difficult to do. They're so difficult to do because in any research study, we need to get informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
And to test the ideas that you're talking about there, we need to manipulate safety and threat in
Yeah.
sometimes quite implicit ways. And it borders on unethical,
Mm.
and it's very, very hard to do. But if your question was, have I thought much about that? The answer is, oh, yeah. It makes so much sense to me. And there are studies in the field that get at different aspects of that encounter. But one thing that you said, Brett, that I loved was contextualizing the sensory input or sensory data. And massage therapists, probably more than any other group, I would imagine, have the opportunity to develop a relationship that you can clothe the patient in safety. You can provide all the little bits of the Trivial Pursuit pie thing, that says you're safe here. And in the massage therapists I work with, and I know they're so good at it. They're just so good at it. And the way they combine an implicit psychological sort of message in timing and context with touch, even in our interactions talking about the football. You can tell. And I think a lot of physios are good at this as well. Even the way that a physio will finish a conversation with a patient and reinforce the key points with some sort of touch. I mean, it's just cool. It's cool. And as you've touched on, excuse the pun, as you've mentioned, that touch sends a barrage of data. like it's an extraordinary bunch of data that happens if you have some sort of mechanical stimulus. It's quite amazing. Anyway, I think it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can create a brain, if you like, a brain readiness for that data that just oozes safety. And ultimately, in my view, whether we protect ourselves or not comes down to a balance between cues for danger and cues for safety, or possibly cues for need to protect this part of your body versus cues that you don't. And I think there's that sort of conceptual pairing, as you've said. You create this situation where you provide intense somatosensory data within the context of safety. So that's this broad idea. But if we were to look at it neurophysiologically, we could hypothesize with some confidence that you can activate neural networks at multiple layers of the nervous system, neuroimmune system, and really we should call these neuroimmune networks. For short, I call them neurotags, just because it's a shorter word. And these neurotags are always firing, in my view, just consistent with what's going to happen next. And you can now start to pair quite complex and big, if you like, somatosensory inputs with the activation of neuroimmune networks or neurotags that are about safety.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real opportunity there, and I guess I would add on to it that, in my view, and there are many respectable, clever, kind people who don't share my view on this. In my view, the power of the manual therapies for people in chronic pain is the opportunity to change their understanding of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the power is in changing behavior of the tissues, flushing stuff out, resetting alpha gamma loops. I think the power is in reconceptualization of the problem, possibly at an implicit but maybe also an explicit level. And that in some fields, in some manual therapy fields, is seen a little bit like heresy.
Yeah.
And certainly in physiotherapy, when I started to vocalize that opinion, which I reckon was pretty well grounded in good science, it was a pretty rocky road within my profession, for sure. And it's not completely smooth traveling now, a long time later. I've been trolled, regularly by people who find that idea really confronting.
Yeah, I have a lot of massage therapy friends that don't like talking to me about massage because I kind of go down that track too. And they're like, this goes right in the face of everything that I've learned, all of these
Yeah,
really fancy modalities that I paid a lot of money for, and all these advanced techniques for resetting the fascia and doing this and doing that. And yeah, so I've just learned how to kind of hold my tongue in certain circumstances, but I've also found by integrating some of this understanding, I've actually had really great results with people with
yeah,
actually doing what I think a lot of massage therapists kind of look down on as like a relaxation massage. At
right,
least here in the States, there's a distinction between like medical massage and then the relaxation, with medical being those really specific advanced techniques that are doing these very structural things, and then the relaxation just being your general Swedish flow. And I actually find that I can get the same kind of results by just creating a really safe environment where the client can really sink into a deep, deep state of relaxation. And, I also think another part is that people don't really know how to relax as well.
right, yeah,
It's kind of a learned skill. So that's kind of been the
sure.
the focus of kind of my work.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, it's kind of made me a little bit of an island in a sea of massage therapists who are going in one direction, and great for job
Yeah,
security though.
I I I bet it has actually, and yeah, we set up this non-profit, or I set up this non-profit 8 years ago called Pain Revolution, And one of the reasons for that was the feedback that was finding its way back into into our group and others who are sort of very interested in the underlying science of how pain works and how recovery works and how treatments work. And that message was for the clinicians out there, and you might relate to this, the clinicians out there who were, in my view, contemporary, who were really pushing the scientifically based stuff and confronting that in their own models of operating and understanding of how things work, and how does this advanced technique work, what's it doing, and interrogating that and getting their head around modern pain science, that they were being ostracized and excluded, and in some cases trolled. A few had to leave the town they were living in. So one of the objectives of Pain Revolution was to provide a support network for, and when I say this, I think, wow, isn't that remarkable, for clinicians pushing the evidence-based practice.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So you might relate to that. But alongside that, this sense that we've got to support these people, and we resort, so part of what we do is we train them in skills of bringing this stuff to their colleagues, and running in-services and professional development in their network and community outreach in their network. And by and large, it's amazing. Like it's a very impactful non-profit that we see community level transformations in these small towns in the country. But alongside that, I actually have a great, I don't know what the word is, but of course this is threatening. Of course this is threatening in my world. Just imagine someone who really high in their values list is the power in their hands to do these techniques. And when they do these techniques, they see that it works. And like every other human, they're vulnerable to confirmation bias. Because a technique works doesn't mean it works the way that you were told it would. So someone starts throwing peer-reviewed scientific articles with pretty compelling data at you, saying, I think there are other better explanations for why that had an analgesic effect. Then of course you might get, in Australia, I'm fond of, you don't see it in the camera, I'm folding my arms right now. In Australia, at least, you get the fuck off posture.
Yeah.
And I get it, and I think this is why we have to be compassionate with our colleagues who are hanging on to stuff, because the evidence seems to support their ideas. I remember having a conversation with a very high-profile manual therapist who had established a whole way of doing stuff to joints, whole framework that a lot of clinicians got success with. And part of that conversation was this person telling me, oh yeah, we now understand the neurophysiology of this. It's activating, I think it was Paxinian corpuscles, these particular mechanoreceptors, and you have to activate them in exactly the right way. And that's why it takes so long to learn. You have to do all my courses to get your advanced techniques right and get examined, and a lot of people can't feel it for the first whatever. And I said, so Paxinian corpuscles have a receptive field about the size of a dinner plate. So it shouldn't matter what you do, because you're going to be activating them in a very similar way. And that began a tirade and personal attack. And later on, to their credit, they got in touch and they'd been thinking about that. But I was wondering about why was that? And I think it was because it totally undermined their theory of why everything worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would freak out if someone did that to me.
Yeah.
And I've got better at engaging in those situations than I used to be.
Yeah. Well, it's also their bread and butter. That's how they're paying their bills, and they spend a lot of time, a lot of investment, which also kind of limits your ability to take any sort of challenge and to see like, oh, there's some other data that says otherwise, you're a lot less likely to pay heed to that when your livelihood depends on it, which I
Absolutely.
recognize with a lot of fellow massage therapists who bill themselves as, like a myofascial release practitioner or something, which I incorporate some of the work, but I don't communicate it in the same way where like, all right, now we're gonna like loosen up your fascia and but there are people who, yeah, that's how they feed their family.
Yeah.
So I understand the hesitancy to open up to these new things, but fundamentally, I think it's like, what can we do to help clients and people who are in pain? It might be look the exact same way, but I think the framing can actually really liberate people to open up their perspective on how to relate to their bodies and sensations. And I think, when we isolate it to something's injured, then I think that actually makes us kind of more weak in a way. Like I think it
Yeah, sure.
actually makes
Yeah.
us less resilient because we're just this body that's really prone to breaking instead of the kind of neuroplastic mess of things
Yeah.
that is always
Yeah.
rewiring and
Yeah, it's,
but
it's always in this constant state of
yeah,
doing stuff, right?
yeah.
I'd love to respond to a couple of things there that I
Hmm.
think this is not the sole domain of massage therapists, this disconnect between some who are taking a framework that I would describe as basic science and empirical evidence
Hmm.
based, and people who are taking a more guru trained approach. There's nothing special about massage therapists in that world. We could apply exactly the same observation to physio for sure,
Hmm.
chiro, osteo, medicine, uh, the people who put in neuromodulators, the people who prescribe drugs. Uh, these these systems are. This is reflecting humanity, I think, and
Yeah.
we may very well learn. There may be a few discoveries in the next decade or 20, 30, 40 years where you and I learn, oh, we we were wrong
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
so wrong. And I think we need to be careful of that. I certainly feel like I need to be careful of that because sometimes I think, wow, this is so compelling and convincing. It's got to be true. And as a scientist, you sort of can't mention the true word.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the conniptions that we all had when we asked 500 members of the general public, what should we call these four key concepts that people have volunteered as being critical for their recovery? And they said overwhelmingly, call them essential pain facts. And as a
That's so bold.
scientist, we thought, no, we can't have a fact. It can't be a fact. We said, what about essential pain? Probably correct as far as we know it at the moment, according to the science. Yeah. Anyway,
Hard to
so
sell.
we do have to be careful. We do have to be careful with that. And I, what I'm loving in what you're describing, Brett, is that the the skills that you develop through maybe through all these advanced technique stuff and all that provides you with a confidence holding safe the entire person in front of you, and being confident knowing your way around their body and their tissues. And I guess I would just say, just match that with being more confident knowing their way around their psychology and their neurophysiology. And I'm very confident to predict your outcomes will get better. Uh, but it's a hard shift to make.
Yeah, there's an element of this that I think is interesting. The social element of being a practitioner, a manual therapist. I'm sure physio is also very close with somebody, and I wonder if that in itself is part of like the context that helps people kind of rewire a little bit, being in that kind of safe container where it doesn't really matter what you do as much as how you do it. And again, if you have that confidence and if you're able to match a quality of presence with somebody and then you have the manual intervention, I almost feel like if you really nail those down, you can get a lot without actually doing it correctly or evidence based. I guess, is there an element of the social interaction that is itself therapeutic?
I believe so. I think that there's a good scientific rationale for predicting that to be the case. there's a great anthropological grounding for predicting that to be the case, and there's empirical evidence to support that being the case. And it's nuanced and I think way more complex and implicit than you might immediately imagine. We've just finished a study here. It's not published yet, so I won't give you full details, but the general vibe of the study, it comes back on the back of beautiful work by someone called Felicity Braithwaite, where she was very interested in dry needling and in my view, the pretty flimsy physiological rationale for the effect of dry needling, and at least one of the physiological rationales, and the dependence on this twitch and stuff like this, and then in the same world, patients reporting great benefit from dry needling and clinicians thinking this is the best thing I've ever done. And so Felicity, in her PhD, she partnered up with a range of different skill-setted people, including magicians, to collaboratively design a sham treatment that could be used in a clinical trial of dry needling. And in that, they developed a beautiful sham, and it included having to trick the clinicians into thinking they're using real needles when they weren't.
Wow.
And the way that we did that was we got actors in to be the first patient who acted the twitch, and so it was quite a laborious process. But what Felicity was able to do was to establish a sham dry needling protocol that neither the clinician, these were all physiotherapists who were dry needling practitioners, neither them nor the patients detected that they were shams. They couldn't tell the difference between the shams or the real needles. And then several studies that have come off the back of that clearly show that the needles don't have to go in to get symptomatic relief that can last for days, and so these tests on people with chronic knee pain, in some cases solve the problem every now and then. The needles don't have to go in, but the clinician and the patient have to believe they went in and have to believe that they were going to work. And part of that is around this social engagement. One of the hypotheses for this study, for one of those studies that we're really confident on, has turned out not to be supported. And that hypothesis was on the back of a beautiful drug injection study by Richard Gracely 30, 40 years ago, where it was a double-blind, randomized controlled trial of a drug called fentanyl.
Oh, that little one.
You know a lot about fentanyl over there. And what they did was randomly allocate some dentists to thinking they were injecting fentanyl when they weren't.
Mm.
And they looked at the pain relief, and that study clearly showed that if the dentist's prediction on the probability that they're injecting fentanyl affects pain relief, even though the probability is not any different. So it's not the actual probability, it's the dentist's idea of the probability. So I love that study because it to me provided compelling information that if you believe what you're doing is about to give pain relief, you're halfway there. Wow. Maybe you're not halfway there. You're some of the way there. That belief that what you're doing is good. And what I noticed when this mix for me, my personal mix of craving neuroscience, biology, bit of neurophilosophy, theoretical stuff, craving that, and craving the empowerment of my patients to understand and master their situation. That little mix of me, as well as my own, with my own strengths and vulnerabilities and constraints and values, that cooking pot of me, combined with the cooking pot of the patients that I was seeing, meant that the more I understood some of these manual advanced techniques that I had trained in, the less effective I became delivering them.
Wow.
And that was really clear to me. And that was part of my initial disillusionment that I sort of spoke about at the beginning. For some people that won't happen. For me, that clearly happened.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
without realizing, that same cooking pot of stuff that is me and stuff that is the person in front of me, when I started to explain, again, out of my own constraints, skills, values, vulnerabilities, why I thought I couldn't help them, I was helping them. I mean, it's mad, right? It's
Yeah.
nuts.
Wow. Yeah. So, we're about 50 minutes in, and there's probably some people who are listening to this and are like, this all is really great theoretically, but I'm in pain right now and I need to know what to do about it. And, I guess if we could dedicate just a little bit of time into what would you recommend for people? Is it really unique based on their circumstances, or is there a general rule of thumb that you're like, this will help pretty
Uh,
much anybody?
um, I was feeling confident until you said this will help.
Yeah.
And I guess the only thing that I think is a lock-in to be helpful is from the perspective of the providers of care and advice like us, is total respect for the experience and for the person with the experience. And I think we can't go wrong if we really prioritize that empathy for what it's like. But that's no one in pain listening to that will think, oh, great, I've got to go and find myself some respect and empathy. So I guess I'll answer that really from the safety point of empirical evidence. I'll respond to that first. So if someone has chronic pain, my interpretation of the evidence is that there are some things you can lock in, take to the bank to be as close as we can get to true based on current science. And they are understanding, getting your head around, and that's not easy, these essential pain facts. That's the first thing, because we have quite a big set of data from randomized controlled trials and from real world, we call it real world data. So data that's been pulled out of audits in clinical practice and stuff like that. And when we do that, we get consecutive patients. So we don't just cherry pick the patients who do well. We aim for 95% data collection on every patient across these centres. And so if we take randomized controlled trial data and real world data, and then we do fancy statistics on the randomized controlled trial data, that tells us that when people gain an understanding of how pain works inside us and how plasticity works and how adaptability works, when they can understand enough of that, then their chances of improvement and indeed recovery drastically improve. So the clinical trials where we get a really standardized treatment and everyone gets this standardized treatment, or gets this in our trials a sham intervention that's trying to match the placebo stuff. When we do that, we get a slight advantage to the group that got the active treatment over the other group, only a slight advantage. But when we do these posh statistics on it, it tells us that the main mediator of the effect, so the main change inside those people that seems to then predict their pain and disability improvements, is a change in understanding. And it explains almost the entire effect. And I'll say that again because this is, in my view, this should be field transforming. It explains almost the entire effect. And that comes out of our clinical trial work, but also other clinical trials not done by our group. The same theme emerges. They do it differently, but the same theme emerges. And then I think there is a principle of learning or of adaptation within your system that seems to be very reliable, and that is that there is a sweet zone for adaptation, for positive adaptation, and people can probably get their head around this pretty easily if they think about times when they've wanted to get fitter or stronger, or learn a musical instrument or a language, or they've started to wear new shoes and they get calluses, different paces on their feet, or if they use a hammer a lot, their their hands change. So these principles are what I would describe as being bioplasticity. So that's neuroplasticity, but across all of our biology. And those principles that seem to be very, very reliable is that if people can give enough of a demand on their system to trigger an adaptation of some sort, but not so much as to trigger a protective response, then they are in the sweet zone for change. And as far as we can tell, if they get in the sweet zone, they will change. But the change is slow, and you need to be patient, and you need to be persistent, and you often need a good coach. But what our data clearly show is that you can understand the sweet zone for change, but if you don't have your head around those essential pain facts, it doesn't make a lot of sense about what determines when you're in and not in your sweet zone for change. So it's really about, in my view, and we're about to launch this big public health campaign across a big section of rural Australia, where we have these 4 essential pain facts, and then we have 4 helpful behaviours. But we know from the published research that if we just talk about the behaviours, which are really intuitive, gradually increase what you're doing, find things that give you safety messages, people you love, places you love, sounds you love, wherever you can, modify that, learn some cognitive skills, learn how to gradually increase your physical activity, learn how to eat better, learn how to sleep more regularly and better. Those are behaviours that we absolutely know enhance the likelihood of recovery. But most people with chronic pain listening to this will say, I've tried that. Or another person telling me to lose weight. That's frustrating, it's annoying. And what our data, what I think is going to transform our field in chronic pain is getting across those 4 essential pain facts more quickly, more efficiently, so that they land, so that they're not offensive and they're not threatening, so that we're all on the same page, so that we avoid the scenario where one of your listeners may, let's hope, be sitting there thinking, this is good. I'm going to have a crack at this. Where can I learn about the essential pain facts and how can I understand them? So it's not just a case of hearing them. It's a case of understanding them. It's hard to do. So some of your listeners might be thinking that, and I think fantastic. Let's say that was the case. And then they go back to their doctor or their physio or their massage therapist and say, I listened to Brett's podcast. It's amazing. Had this really weird guy from Australia on there who talked about the essential pain facts, and I've been learning about them. And did you know that pain protects us and promotes healing? And that clinician says, no, pain tells you you've got an injury. That moment could be enough to unwind everything.
Yeah.
So I think we need everyone on a contemporary, scientifically grounded page for this. So I guess my quick answer, I don't like the idea of advice. My quick answer to that question, what can someone do? I would say the evidence tells us in a pretty compelling way, get your head around modern pain messaging. And this does not mean going to do watch a lecture on pain neuroscience education. That's what we were doing 20 years ago. And we're not very good at that. So we're trying to get better at the key messages. And if you can get a head around those 4 key essential pain facts, and you could go and have a look at our non-profit website on this, it's called painrevolution.org, and that will introduce you to these ideas. But I would say you're going to have to do the work of learning about this stuff. You've got to do the work. Without doing the work, the evidence suggests that even the best treatments we've got are much less likely to be helpful until you understand and almost you own the journey. It's not anyone's fault that they're in chronic pain, and I really believe that strongly. And I say to patients, it's not your fault that you're here, but it's going to be your responsibility to find your way out. And I'd like to help if you'd like me to help you, but I'm not here to give you periodic pain relief, because that's not going to find your way out of this possibly dark, terrifying jungle. But the evidence clearly says that everyone outside of a worsening pathological disease process, everyone can improve. But they're going to have to do the work. I hope that's more hopeful than demoralizing.
Yeah, you struck a really good balance with that. Yeah. Well, I want to respect your time, so I guess this is probably that's a great cliff note to end it on. For people who are interested in what you're saying and might want to learn more, what would be the best way for them to they close out this podcast? What's the next step?
Yeah, I guess the call to action that we always try and put is just be open-minded enough, be curious enough to go and suss out the essential pain facts. Start there. And then I guess just keep plodding along towards understanding and then learning along the way. You'll learn skills that because your understanding tells you, oh, actually, my pain is worse when I have a big night the night before. Actually, I think it might be worse. So I'm just going to back off on those big nights, for example. Yeah. My massage therapists, I don't know, they just seem to always want to just release things and it hurts and I get relief for a day. I'm going to say to them, what do you know about the essential pain facts from Pain Revolution? That would be a sensible next step. Yeah. I could always say, read my books. But,
there it is.
I think there's better ways to start than that. Yeah. And if you fall in love with it all like I did and like thousands of people have, yeah, you'll read my books.
Yeah. They sell themselves. Wonderful. Well, Lorimer, thank you so much for joining me. Truly, this has been a treat. I could have probably talked to you for 4 or 5 hours. So
I think that I was probably doing too much of the talking, but
no, it's
been fun.
That was what I was looking for. So yeah, we'll catch you some other time. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brett.
All right, everybody, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. Once more, that was Dr. Lorimer Moseley. You can check out his work over at painrevolution.org and begin your journey into the world of pain science. It really is such a meaningful practice to take on for yourself, even if you're someone who's not in pain. I highly encourage just taking in some of that information because you will at some point experience it, as we all do. It's very human, very natural, and safe as well. So if you want to support this show, you can head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. Consider becoming a member. It really helps in the long run for me. You can also subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, or like us on Facebook. Any and all of those things is helpful, and I appreciate it very much. We will catch you on the next episode.